All right, this game is getting increasingly incoherent. So the last video, I made this elevator that goes between the first floor and the second floor, the lower deck and the upper deck. And this little add-on here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a room that'll kill us if we go into it without wearing something. So this is going to be the reactor room, and if we go in there without the radiation suit, then we'll die, or we have to be wearing the radiation suit to go into the reactor room. What we do in the reactor room, I haven't quite figured out yet, but maybe we have to go in there to get something. This is also going to end up kind of being interesting because we've got some other stuff in here. We've got a lab coat that we could wear, and if we can probably not be, maybe we can't wear the lab coat and the radiation suit at the same time. So we'll have to figure out how to work around that. So, there's a bunch of different things. We could do a check. We could say, before wearing the lab coat, check if you're wearing the radiation suit, or if you're trying to put on the radiation suit, check if you're wearing the lab coat. One way to do it. Okay, so let's pop over to Lantern. And I've got the radiation suit that is in the upper deck. It is portable and wearable. I've created a reactor room here, and I've put a neutron reactor in the reactor room. Now, you want to be fair about stuff like this. You don't want to just kill the player out of nowhere. So maybe I've got I need some way to know if the reactor has been fixed or not. Now, for something like that, we need a variable. Like, a variable is just a piece of data that can store a number. So I'm going to go to the Variables tab here, and I'm going to make a variable called reactor fixed. Now, maybe in the future there will be some other way to know if the reactor is fixed, but I'm going to set it to 0. And I'm going to click Add. So 0 is generally false or no. 1 is generally true or yes. So I'm going to make a variable called reactor fixed. And if I run my program now, let me save this. I'm going to save this as, protective clothing or something. Sure. If I run this now, and I type the word VARS, this is not a text adventure command, this is just a debugging command. It'll dump out the variables in the game. And we should see that we have one called, reactor fixed right there, and it's set to 0. So we can see the state of our variables by typing VARS. It'll dump out our variables. That can be very helpful. So let's do something fun here. I'm going to make, imagine that we want an alarm going off. If the reactor is not fixed, we want some sort of alarm going off. So what we're going to do is we'll make an event called radiation alarm. So events are functions that run every turn and are not wired up to any particular command. And these are for kind of housekeeping your game, doing environmental stuff, moving NPCs around. Maybe calculating the score of the game. I'm going to make an event called radiation alarm. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to test if the player is in the upper deck and the reactor has not been fixed. I'm going to print out like there's a radiation alarm is blaring. So if tab, that creates an if statement. If the player is in the upper deck, so that means the player's location is the upper deck. PL tab, dot L tab. Double equal for test for equality, for a compare, is equal to upper, I think it's just upper deck. So if the player is in the upper deck, okay, now how do you say and? And is the double ampersand, shift 7, that means and. When you see that, just read and. If the player's location is the upper deck, and what was it called, reactor fixed, is equal to 0, so if the player is in the upper deck and the reactor fixed is 0, which means it has not been fixed, I'm going to print PR tab, a radiation alarm is blaring. There we go. So now if I run this, wait. A radiation alarm is blaring. A radiation alarm is blaring. Why? Because every time I execute a command, the events run. And this event says if the player's in the upper deck and the reactor hasn't been fixed, then print that message. Or maybe I don't check the player's location. Maybe I just have that print that out anywhere. Now notice if I go into the reactor room, I'm okay, it stops because this event says that the player has to be in the upper deck. But the idea would be that you're warning the player that they're about to do something stupid. Now we could put the code in here for our event. Maybe we could, yeah. Maybe we do that. All right. Let's say kill the player if not wearing something in a location. Let's see what this does for us. Which location kills the player? The reactor room. Okay. What does the player have to wear to be safe? The radiation suit. Okay. So if the player's location is the reactor room and the radiation suit's warn bit or warn property is set to 0, then print like you start to feel warm, then sick, very sick. You've died of radiation poisoning. So that's just what my little snippet says right there. And then you can change the text of that as needed. And then we kill the player. Could we have put these in 2 separate events? Yes. So let's test this. Wait. Okay, so fine. Radio south. Okay. This is yeah, you start to feel warm, then sick, very sick. You have died of radiation poisoning. You have died. Press any key. Okay, so then the game reset. So we're testing if the player is in a particular location and a piece of clothing is not being worn. All right, so let's just test this again. Let's run this again. Take suit. Wear suit. Okay, you put on the radiation suit. If I type I for inventory, it says the radiation suit's being worn. See, now I can wait here all day in the reactor room. I'm fine. Drop suit. There's no real verb to take off the suit, but we could add that. Drop the suit. And I die, right? So I have to be wearing the radiation suit to be safe in that environment. Now here's like, what if I were already wearing the lab coat? Let me take the lab coat and let me put that. I'm going to give that to the player, and I'm going to say that it's being worn. And so we're assume that we're upstairs and we're wearing the lab coat. So see how it says that we're wearing a lab coat? Let's make it so when I put on the radiation suit, I take off the lab coat. So I'm going to make a function here called take off lab coat. And so we're going to do this before we put on the radiation suit. So we'll say if the lab coat's worn property is set to 1, the lab coat's being worn, PR, tab, you first take off the lab coat. Okay, and then what does that mean? So now the lab coat dot worn is set to 0. So we're taking off the lab coat, but we're still keeping it in the player's inventory. So we've made a function that said, hey, if the lab coat's being worn, print, you take the lab coat off. Now we're going to set the lab coat's worn property to 0. Now, how do we integrate this into what we already have? So let's go to our sentences and let's find where, put up where. If the verb is where and the noun is the radiation suit, then I want to call my take off lab coat function. Now I don't want to select instead, I want to select before, because there's already a built-in mechanism for wearing something. That's the instead thing. The instead is kind of the built-in mechanism for doing something. But I just want to say before I do that, I want to do this other function. So let's add this. So before wearing the radiation suit, take off the lab coat. Let's save that. You first take off the lab coat. You put on the radiation suit. Now if I type inventory, see, I have a lab coat, but the lab coat isn't being worn and the radiation suit isn't being worn. Now, I probably want to do something. I mean, this is just kind of polish. I think it's pretty cool. But we could also do something like take off radiation suit. Click add. And then let's just copy and paste all that. If the radiation suit is being worn, first take off the radiation suit. So this gets kind of crazy when you have a lot of things that you could wear simultaneously. But generally, you don't have more than like two costs, or one thing to wear in a game anyway. Radiation suit worn property is 0. Okay, so we've made a function that says if the radiation suit is being worn, you take it off, and then clear the fact that it's being worn anymore. Set its worn property to 0. And then we'll wire this up to, if I put on the lab coat, then I want to take off the radiation suit before I actually process the command. So let's try this again. Take suit. So hang on, drop coat. Take coat. So now I'm not wearing it anymore. Wear coat. Wear coat. Wear it. Wear the lab coat. You put on the lab coat. Wear radiation suit. You first take off the lab coat, right? So is that what we did before? Wear the lab coat. You first take off the radiation suit. So that's pretty cool. So people ask me, what do these before instead things do? Most of the time you use instead. After is usually used for overriding the way a command was reported to you, like for printing. So if you drop something, it prints dropped, or if you close something, it prints closed, or wearing prints, you put on the whatever. And then before is used for kind of doing some housekeeping before you actually carry out a command. So that's pretty slick. But the key thing there was events. Events are used to do the housekeeping in your game, to check for conditions in your game, to make things happen in your game. And they are not wired up to any commands. Every time you enter a command, the events run. So there you go. And of course, there's lots of snippets to help you with that. So now we know how to do like an instant death room, or a room that requires us to have some protective clothing. And then one final thing. If you don't want the clothing involved in this at all, just get rid of that. Right? If the player's location is a reactor room, boom, kill the player. This is now an instant death room. But here we're going to be nice. We're going to say if the player's in that room and they're not wearing the suit, and we've hinted that they need to wear the suit. A radiation alarm is blaring. Okay, so there we go. There's a protective clothing / instant death puzzle.